Another good clap by Johnny Ferentz there. So we're here again. Regen Ag Labs with Lance Gunderson. We really dove into the fertility aspect in the first part. Now we're doing this solely towards the soil health aspects on the Haney test. Again, let's start with maybe misconceptions or things that you feel like you're saying a lot because maybe you just need some clarity. And
sure,
yeah.
So, oh boy, the soil health section of this. I got to pick on Rick a little bit. So on the Haney test, Rick has a number called the soil health calculation.
Yep.
And I wish it wasn't called that. I really do. And it's funny because Rick and I joked around about it. I said, what we come up with this soil health calculation? He said, because everybody early on called him and said, I need you to take all this information and reduce it into a single number. Right?
Yep.
So it's everybody else's fault that it exists. But that's where it came from. And I tell everyone that it is the most meaningless number on the report. But yet at the same time, we're going to walk through what I do when I get a report.
There you go.
So guess what the very first number is I look at? The soil health calculation.
There you go.
The most meaningless number on the report. Okay. No, but the reason I do that, and the reason I say that is because obviously that number does not encompass soil health. The Haney test does not encompass soil health, right?
Yeah.
There are, and this is something that obviously Rick knows, and that's his biggest critique of it, of himself. But we start there because it tells me where to look next.
Exactly.
Okay. Yep. So on that soil health score, we say we like to see the number reach 7 or above.
Okay.
Now the old joke is that, why 7? Like, how'd you come up with 7? And I just always joked around and said, well, why not? Why not 7? No, it has to do with that is kind of the tipping point where we start to see nitrogen being released. Typically, we've got a high enough level of microbial activity and biomass that we're starting to see benefit economically on the fertility portion that we talked about earlier. So at 7, we're starting to see nitrogen being mineralized most of the time because you can't score really well and have a seed-in ratio that's completely out of whack.
Yeah.
You can't score really well and have a soil respiration that's really low, right? So the components of that score are the same things that we use to calculate organic nitrogen release, organic phosphorus release. And the feedback that we were given from people is saying, hey, my residue is disappearing when I start to get above these numbers. So part of that number 7 is why. Now, we really like to see it get above 10. Now, the question that people ask me all the time say, well, how high can it be? Well, the scale technically is infinite.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just limited by whatever we can measure. But the highest number I've seen is around 48.
Wow.
That was a heavily composted, manured soil.
Yep.
I have seen just straight soil run about 37, 38.
Still, that's up there.
Okay. Now, much like yield, that score has a potential based on your soil type, your climate.
Yep.
Okay. If a guy in eastern Colorado can realistically grow 80 bushel corn and a guy in central Illinois says, well, my farm average is 260, well, you can plant the same hybrid, you can do all the same things, you're not going to get the same result.
Exactly. Yep.
So it's the same thing with this soil health number. Generally, I'll give a real world example. Several years ago, I had a guy call me up. He was from New Mexico. He was an organic pecan farmer.
Okay.
Know nothing about organic pecans, but he was telling me for 10 years, he'd been grazing goats and sheep in his orchard. He's planting 20-way mixes in his alleyways. Of course, being organic, he hadn't done any of the other stuff. He was 100% no-till, and he was doing all these things. And he was so disappointed because his Haney test soil health score was a 6.8, right?
Okay.
He was just, what am I doing all this for? So he went across the fence. I'm going to say he had permission.
Yep.
He went across the fence, pulled a sample off his neighbor's organic pecan farm. Managed completely differently, though. Exclusive tillage, bare alleyways, right? Looked like a pool tabletop. That soil scored a 1.2. That is still the lowest score I've seen on a soil health test. And I'm not picking on him.
Yep.
Part of that's environment, right?
100%. Yep.
Now, he went to a native area that was 250 yards from his pecan orchards. His great-grandfather told him, as far as he knows, it's never been, under management. That scored a 7.3. Okay. Wow. So now we have a little context around the score.
Exactly.
Right. And understand. And then I said, well, you should feel a lot better about where you're at. So the first number I look at is that score. Now, if I get a score back and it's 17, I don't really need to look at the other soil health metrics on the Haney test because
it's cranking.
They're encompassed in that score I just looked at. Right.
Yep.
I don't really need to dive too deep into them. But if I get a score of 5, that's where I'm going to start saying, okay, now where do I need to look? What's dragging this down, right? So first thing I'm going to jump to after that soil score is respiration. Mentioned before, soil respiration in this context, when you measure soil respiration in the lab, what you're really measuring is biomass. So we dry the soil down. We shut the microbes down. Guess what? We kill them. We kill a lot of them.
Yep.
And when we re-wet the soil and incubate it, we incubate it at room temperature. So it's about 72, 73 degrees Fahrenheit. Those microbes are so quick to wake up. And what they do is they start to consume all their dead buddies.
Okay.
And then they are consuming other resources available. So, if you're killing 95% of these microbes, well, killing 95% of 100 or killing 95% of 1,000, killing 95% of 10,000, that dictates how big that CO2 release is. And it's based off of an old method. It's called the chloroform fumigation incubation method. They would use chloroform to basically kill 99% of the microbes, and then they would incubate them and see how much CO2 came back. So same concept. We're just doing it with water because it's a natural process. Soil's dry and re-wet. And for those of you that are sitting in a drought, you're saying, yeah, right, they never re-wet. And for the guys that are saying, I'm soggy, they never dry out. But trust me, they do. It may not happen at the time you want it, but it happens. And these microbes are adapted for this. And we're measuring that CO2. Now, the higher that number, the higher your biomass. Now, everyone thinks, well, the higher the number, the better. Well, makes your soil health score higher, but it changes what you might do around management.
Okay.
So think of it as supply and demand. You've got a bunch of microbes that are demanding carbon. They're demanding phosphorus. They're demanding nitrogen because they need all those things too. Now, if they can get carbon from the plant, so 50%, roughly 50% of all the carbon captured by your corn crop is passed out into the soil while it's alive.
Yep.
Now, that's by design. It's not by mistake. Corn is not leaky. It's doing this because it knows if it feeds these organisms, that's where 95% of its nutrition's coming back.
Yeah.
If I piss those organisms off, they're going to tie it all up, right? I'm not getting it. So it's a feedback back and forth. And that's what they're ended up doing right there. And so the goal with this is we say, okay, I look at this respiration. Then I'm going to jump to carbon, water-soluble carbon. How much food do I have available to these microbes? Now, we summarize that in one number. It's called percent MAC. So MAC stands for microbially active carbon. In other words, what percentage of the carbon available is being consumed by the organisms?
Okay.
So if you have a respiration of 200 and your carbon is 70, you've got a really high demand and a really low supply, right?
Yeah.
They're chewing through carbon. Over time, what happens is the microbes are going to start to consume soil organic matter, like the stuff that isn't normally available. They're going to eat it. It's slow, but they'll eat it. And your microbial biomass will start to drop over time. Okay. Because they just can't access enough food. So, management goal, we should try to get that carbon number up there. We should, this is where, again, the dirty words, depending on where you're at, cover crops, compost, you want to get some of these things in there because corn and beans on a straight rotation is a carbon negative system.
All together, just going back and forth there. Okay.
It is. Yep. It's just a carbon negative system. So looking at that respiration, let's take the other side of it. Your respiration's 50, your carbon's 400. Is food the problem?
No.
Is it a lack of food? No, it's not. And so generally then it's something else. And you say, well, what is that something else? So the next step we jump right into is I'm going to look at soil pH. So for all the people that think, soil health, we're going to throw all of conventional agronomy out the window. Nah, absolutely not. No. We're going to look at soil pH. At extreme pHs, below 5.8, 5.5, fungi have a distinct advantage over bacteria.
Yep.
At pHs that are above 7.5, bacteria have a distinct advantage over fungi. In that neutral range, we're kind of equal. Then it plays off of other management things.
Okay.
Tillage favors bacteria.
Yep. No-till will be more of your fungi dominant.
Yep. But you still got to have a lot of carbon going into that.
Yeah.
Guys that are just straight no-till corn beans, I mean, they don't have a lot of fungi either because, again, carbon negative system. So when you start looking at that and you say, okay, well, now food's not my problem, I'm going to look at pH. In some cases, that can be addressed. If it's low, it's a lot easier to address.
Yeah, I'd rather see a low than a way high.
Absolutely. And we've seen, there's been research done. There was a big study published, it might be 5-7 years ago now. Ohio State worked with Purdue and I think Penn State. There was a few of them in there. And they looked at different calcium additions and the response of the microbial community was part of that study.
Okay.
So they used, liquid cal, they put on gypsum, they did lime, and they found that lime caused the largest positive response in microbial community if the pHs required it.
Okay.
Right? So you're not going to see that response. If you go put lime on a soil that's got a pH of 6.8, you don't see the same response. But if your pH is below 6 and you put lime on, they see a big response from the microbial community from that. So pH is one of them. If my pH is good, or if there's just nothing I can do about it, right? Like sometimes we got 8.5. That's just what it is.
Yep.
But the next thing I'm looking at is soluble salts.
Okay.
Soluble salts. We talked about misconceptions earlier, but I'm going to mention this one. So all nutrients in the soil are salts.
Yep.
We talk about this a lot of times in the context of chloride and sodium, but they're all salts. Their level of solubility is different. So you can put on 300 pounds of nitrate and your soluble salt number, EC, electrical conductivity, soluble salts goes way up. You can put on 300 pounds of phosphorus and it doesn't move much at all, right?
Yep.
So your 4 big soluble salts, nitrate, sulfate, sodium, and chloride.
Okay.
So gypsum, got to be a little careful with gypsum. You can have a sodic soil and put on gypsum, and now you're stuck with a saline soil.
Exactly. Yeah,
right?
That's exactly, yep.
But when we look at the soil health piece of that, that soluble salt number can influence respiration dramatically. Now, it can be too low. We can have soils that are just really low soluble salts, 0.03.
Okay.
There's not enough fertility in that system for the microbes. They need phosphorus too.
Oh, exactly.
So sometimes the answer is, well, geez, your soluble salts is 0.03. Your phosphorus test comes back at 2 parts per million. Well, I thought the microbes were supposed to mineralize phosphorus. Well, they will, but we got to have enough phosphorus for them to get started.
Exactly.
I thought my alternator was supposed to keep my battery charged. Well, yeah, but you got to get the engine running first, right?
Yep.
So in that case, we might be saying, hey, we need a little bit of phosphorus. Now, again, don't go dump 350 pounds of phosphorus on.
Yeah,
but you go put a little bit out, jumpstart that system up. On the other hand, what we see more commonly is the soluble salt number is high. So I'll give a real world example of this as well. Some of you probably have heard this. Years ago, when Rick was still running samples at the Texas lab, he did not run pH and soluble salts. He didn't have the equipment for that. He ran these tests out of Minnesota. Water soluble carbon numbers were 400, 500, which is 2.5, 3 times higher than average.
Yeah.
Organic matter's 8, 9%. Soil respirations were in the single digits, 5s, 7s, right? Well, the jar leaked. That's what we thought. So he ran them again, and he goes, he called me up, and I said, send the soils up here. So he sent them up. We ran them, but we run pH and soluble salts, and we also were running a full nutrient panel, so we had a couple other things on the extract that he wasn't running.
Okay.
Well, the sulfur was over 2,000 parts per million. Calcium was 4,000, 5,000 on a Haney test. So that's 15, 18,000, right?
Yeah.
And I immediately said, well, they're putting gypsum on at huge rates. And that's exactly what they said they were doing. I don't know why, but they were. And so they salted the soil out. Soluble salts were 4, 5, 6, right? So again, to recap, soil health score, if I'm sitting above 10, I'm not going to dive too far into this other soil health numbers. But I'm going to go from the soil health score to respiration. I'm going to look at respiration relative to the amount of carbon I have available. If I'm short carbon, I'm managing for carbon. If I've got the carbon, but my respiration's low, I'm jumping to pH, I jump to soluble salts, and then I'm going to look at individual fertility metrics, right? That extremely low phosphorus or that extremely low potassium. By the way, that soil I told you that scored a 38.
Yeah.
Scored a 38, and they said they couldn't produce grass. It was an organic dairy in Pennsylvania, and their potassium number was 11.
Oh, goodness.
Right. So, of course, the conventional agronomy then is, hey, your soil health numbers look fantastic, but you got to put potassium on. Yeah. After 80 years, 100 years of grazing and bringing the cows into milk, you've got to put potassium on. And as soon as they did, everything changed.
The system
So,
switched.
again, soil health has to encompass fertility. It has to encompass conventional agronomy, but we also need to encompass some of these biological measures, and the Haney test can do that. Where it falls short, of course, really short, is physical measures, right?
Yeah.
We're not looking at aggregate stability. We're not looking at bulk density. We're not looking at those things. Still, the best tool you have for that is the 2 eyes in your head and a shovel.
Penetrometer. Spend
That's
$200 and get a penetrometer.
Right.
It'll tell you everything you need to know.
Yep. Stick a spade in the ground. Look at that. And and that's really to encompass soil health, right? Yep. But the Haney test can give you some indicators, right? If you've got really low soil organic matter and you've got low water soluble carbon, my respiration's low, odds are you've got pretty bad aggregation. Right?
Yeah.
And you can verify that with a spade, or you can verify it with running a soil test, or you can verify it just from the simple fact that when you get a 2-inch rain, you've got a lake. There's lots of ways to look at that and then say, okay, well, Instead of saying, well, my goal is to build soil organic matter, yeah, that's a secondary goal. Your first goal should be to get soluble carbon into the system to start the microbes, because they will build soil structure. Most of your soil organic matter is dead microbes anyway.
Yeah.
So by building them up and feeding them, don't just go put a bunch of straw on thinking you're going to increase soil organic matter.
Yeah.
Right.
You actually could have a lot of issues by doing that,
That's
because
right.
we talked about that with the carbon to nitrogen ratio.
tie-up and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, those are the things that I'm stepping through. Again, even when it's like, well, how high should my water soluble carbon number be? Well, relative to your respiration.
Yeah.
Right? What should that number be? Well, yeah, we want to see it get higher in general, but we can't forget about the organic nitrogen that's part of that. Because if you just go out and drive that water soluble carbon number up, and now your ratio is 20-1 between carbon and nitrogen, again, organic nitrogen, well, now you got nitrogen tie-up.
Yep.
Right? And so by pushing that up, and I know you're sitting there probably thinking, well, how do I know then what to put in and what to go with? Well, part of the reason of diversity in cover crop mixes is that, well, if you're grazing them, you're offering a buffet. And the microbes are eating that same buffet underground.
Yep.
You've also got the number one influencer of microbial diversity is plant community. And so that is going to drive it more than anything else. When it comes to diversity in soil health, it's not the kind of all-encompassing kumbaya story.
Yeah.
It has to do with functionality. So certain microbes produce different functions. Some of them produce enzymes to move phosphorus. Some produce enzymes to move sulfur. Some are going to fight disease. Some are going to, build the sugars to help structure soil together. And so you're looking at a community. Think of it like the community you live in. You don't want every single person in the community to be a lawyer.
100%. There'd be a lot of arguing.
Yeah.
A lot of arguing.
A lot of money being thrown around.
Well, maybe I'm going to stop you right there real quick.
Yeah.
So you talked about all these different biology, all having different, if you want to call it responses or jobs, right, in that operation. So let's just say a soil's low on bacteria or that respiration count, okay? Those quote-unquote bugs that make sulfur available, make phosphorus available, they probably stay dormant, and then once the condition's right, they activate. Am I wrong by thinking that, Lance?
No, I mean, most of the microbes in the soil are dormant most of the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
We make them, sometimes we make them dormant through management.
Mm-hmm.
Other times they're dormant because it's January or it's July and it's hot and dry. I know, usually I get asked a lot about biologicals and different things, right? And I'm not against any of them. Everyone asks me, well, what works, what doesn't work? And I said, well, you know what? I've never seen a biological work every single place in every situation, and I've never seen one never work in any situation.
Well, it goes back to about any product in agriculture, to tell you the truth.
That's right.
The reason why it's out there is because it's worked somewhere. It's just the honest truth.
Yep. But I will tell you this, the people that I would be most interested in potentially working with on a biological are the same people that are telling you, you know what, I've got this biological, but here are some other things I would suggest we work on in your operation.
Yeah.
Because in other words, why did we get to this point? What were we doing in the system that got us to this point? And if you think about it, we've been using biologicals for
a long time. Inoculating
soybeans, right? We know it works. And it's cheap. So I would tell anybody, if you're planting soybeans, inoculate soybeans.
Yeah.
But I've seen plenty of guys that are far enough down this road, they can plant soybeans.
And they don't need to.
Yeah,
they already created a house.
Right.
Yep.
So those organisms are there. Those beans will nodulate, and they look just like inoculated beans next door.
Well, and I think it's one of those things too, bugs in a jug, whatever. Know what you're trying to do.
Goes back to your goal.
Yeah, like are you limited on phos? So you have your total digestible nutrient. You know you got phos there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, then find a phos solubilizer and trial that.
Yep.
You know, don't just say, well, I just grabbed this and
That's right.
dump it in.
That's right.
Like I told growers this in a growers meeting 2 years ago. If you can't tell me your pH number, let's not talk about biologicals yet.
That's right.
Just because there's so many other precursors before we get to that stage.
That's right. And the other side of that too. So you can, here's another example. I had a gentleman in Kansas who was using a mycorrhizal inoculant on wheat.
Okay.
And he said every time, this was a seed treatment. Sometimes you could do like an in-furrow, but it's typically a seed treatment. And he goes, every time I use this, I'm seeing 12 to 15 bushels on my wheat. He goes, should I do it? And I said, well, that's just simple pencil, right?
Yeah.
Pencil that out
Yep.
mathematically. What do you, I mean, if it's $100 an acre for you to do it, then no. But
exactly. Yep.
so simple math, simple pencil. His question was, more, am I hurting anything by using it? And I said, no, the answer is no. His neighbor on the fence said, well,
I'm going to try that.
Right?
Yeah, I want that.
So he tried it. He got nothing. So one guy says this product is gold and it works. The next guy says this product is garbage and it doesn't work. And I talked to both of them, and I knew both of them pretty well. And I said, well, you, Farmer A, seeing the response, I said, you are in a continuous summer fallow wheat program.
Okay.
Mycorrhiza are not going to survive that summer fallow. There's no bridge of the gap. So when you inoculate, you are seeing this response. His neighbor was in a 5-crop rotation with integrated grazing.
Yeah.
Right? So he's putting something on that his soil doesn't need.
Yeah.
And so he sees no response. And so I told Farmer A, I said, well, you can do one of two things. Keep buying the product year after year.
Yep.
Or if you decide you want to get away from continuous summer fallow wheat, you'll find that product response gets less and less and less over time. And then you kind of wean yourself off. And again, my damn analogies, but medical, I got high blood pressure. Holy cow, it's bad. You take this medicine, but if you change nothing else, you're going to stay on that medicine the rest of your life.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's okay if that's what you want to do. But if you make those other changes and you really do put the effort in, you can kind of wean yourself off that medicine. And a good doctor should tell you that. Some doctors don't.
Yep.
They just, they're like,
Yep.
no, I'm going to take the kickback from the pharmaceutical company and I'm just going to sell you this for the rest of your life.
Yep.
And my advice, same thing with anybody looking to buy biologicals, get yourself a new doctor.
Yep.
Find those companies that are really investing in your management, not just selling you a product. And have a little grace.
Yeah.
Because if you try the product on certain fields and it doesn't work for you, that actually is telling you something.
Exactly.
You didn't need that.
Yeah.
It's not that it didn't work, you didn't need it.
Well, and even sometimes I get to maybe your soil didn't need it at that stage of the progression too.
Right.
Like there's, like you said, and that's something that is part of my mission, right? is sharing this aspect of there's these tools in the toolbox. Every situation's so unique, but there's still principles.
That's right.
That we can utilize to help moving our soil forward. Like we talk about no-till. When no-till first came out, rule number 1 was keep living roots in the soil. And it seems like, at least when I went through college, I don't remember talking about that. Yeah. But that was rule number 1.
Yeah, right.
So it's like, is what I get to. And even like on the biological realm, if people want to do it very cheaply, just know the labor is going to be higher. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to do the labor part, then there is opportunity with some of these products.
That's right.
But like you said, if you're moving your soil forward, the need of that should be less and less and less.
Yep.
And if it's not getting less and less and less, what are we not attacking that we should have been attacking?
That's right.
Is what I get to.
Yep. That's right. Yeah, because when you start talking about, I get asked a question all the time, How do you define soil health? How do you define regenerative agriculture and yada, yada? And there's lots of wonderful definitions out there. There's all these things. And in human beings by nature, we just want to label everything.
Yep.
And we got to have some label for it. Don't get me started on synthetic fertilizer. Drives me crazy. I'll probably end up touching on it if we have time. But regenerative agriculture to me is just, it's taking what you've got today and making it better tomorrow.
Yep.
Now, then the argument becomes, well, what's better? I said, better for you.
Yeah.
Better for your operation, for your context, right? So if you have a problem with erosion, making your soil better is
Keeping
managing
the topsoil
to reduce erosion. And the next guy might say, well, making my system better has nothing to do with erosion. It has to do with infiltration, or it has to do with crop stand, or it has to do with reducing fertility loads, or it has to do with keeping my tile lines clean. Or so whatever that goal is, if you're moving towards that goal and your soil's getting better, that's great.
Yeah. Well, I even get to the part, definitely my neck of the woods, it kind of starts here as like, I need something to graze cattle. Well, we all know, okay, that's goal number one. What would be your second goal now?
Yeah.
Because, it just goes back to intention. And I know I'm beating on a dead horse here, but it's so important. Mm-hmm. Intention, goals, we can help you out a lot more if we if we have a clear goal and a clear intention.
Yeah. Yeah. It does no good for me to generally no good to tell somebody in Central Illinois that you should integrate livestock on your operation.
Yep.
If they say, well, I don't have a livestock animal within 200 miles of me, I don't have the infrastructure, I don't even know how to manage them, I don't know what to do, that's a huge investment.
Yeah.
Right. That's very different than going to somebody out here in Nebraska. They might say, you know what, I don't have cows, but my brother does, my neighbor does, my uncle does, and oh yeah, they're right down the road. They're literally across the fence. I mean, so it's understanding those pieces of that context as well.
Yeah.
To be able to pull that all together to actually drive soil health.
Okay.
Because it's not a one size fits all. There's no one size fits all definition.
No.
There's no one size fits all test. But we try to take your goals and say, okay, these are the tests that can generally help you. These are the ones I would avoid for now. No reason to spend your money on this, and let's look at these things and evaluate these things. Don't get a MRI of your brain if your knee hurts.
Fair enough.
Right?
Yep. Fair enough.
Same idea, same concept. I don't know how we're doing on time, but if we have just
let's dive into it. Let's do it. I don't care if it takes longer. I'm excited for this.
I got a pet peeve, and people can laugh and they can yell and scream at me. I don't care. I hate the concept. I know, like I said, humans, we got to label everything.
Yep.
So, we hear this synthetic fertilizer thing all the time. Look, when we start talking about herbicides, synthetic is a proper application for some of those. That's a proper label.
Yep.
Pesticides, proper label. Nitrogen is an element on the periodic table.
Yep.
Phosphorus is an element on the periodic table. Until we start fertilizing with Einsteinium, all of those elements are naturally occurring. What always drove me crazy is that if we put 1152 on a cornfield, it's conventional. If we chop that corn for silage and feed it to a cow and scoop up the manure, we can put it on the neighboring field.
That's organic.
That's organic.
Yep.
The phosphorus in the manure came from the corn, which partly came from
the map.
It's an element.
Yes.
And PO4 is PO4. That's phosphate. The microbes don't know the difference. The plants don't know the difference. Now, in saying that, for all the people screaming at this, not all fertilizers are created equal.
Agreed.
Right?
Yep.
So, anhydrous ammonium, pretty harsh.
Yep.
It's pretty harsh because of the concentration of it, the pH of it, the way it's applied. That's what makes it harsher than some of the others. The nitrogen in it, though, is no different. And the biggest thing we run into with common fertilizers is its ease.
Yep.
So it's not the product itself, it's the ease of which it can be applied. So it's the fact that we can truck it in and we can put on as much as we're allowed to put on or as much as we're willing to buy, and we can put it all on at once. And those are the biggest issues with that program. It's not necessarily the nutrient itself. It's just how we're applying it, how much we're applying. Those are the issues that we start to run into. So what I'm getting at is that for the truest, the organic people, that's nothing wrong with that. If you're making it work, do it.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with it. I'm not poking at anybody. At the same time, we've got guys on the other extreme that are like, no, I'll put 350 units on and pull 250 corn off.
Yep.
There's a way to do it in the middle.
Yep.
And I will name drop this one, Russell Hedrick. Some of you know him. A few years ago when he grew this big corn crop, the purists were yelling at him because he put nitrogen on and he uses chemistry.
Yeah.
The conventional guys and even the universities were telling him that it was impossible for him to grow what he grew, only putting on as little as he did. Now, you could say 300 pounds of nitrogen is not a little amount of nitrogen. But when you're removing 450 bushels worth of corn, 300 divided by 450 is 0.66.
That's being pretty darn efficient.
And you can't get much more efficient than that.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, hey guys. Did you know that we have a website? It's really cool. It's really neat. You can find it in the link below in the description, or you can just Google singularagronomics.com. It's really neat. You can know that it's Singular Agronomics website because of the way that it is. Check it out.
So 0.66 on a removal rate. And again, it's phosphorus. I think his phosphorus was less than 20 parts per million. Now that's Mehlich 3. For all the people out there going, well, Haney test.
Oh, yeah.
No. Mehlich 3, less than 20 parts per million. I think it was around 18. He yanks 450 bushel corn off, right?
Well,
and he didn't
go ahead.
put on enough P for that. So the point is that and he's not the only one, okay?
Exactly.
So I'm just sharing because I've heard him speak on this so many times. I know these numbers, and he'll throw his whole program up and show it to people. Well, Now, does that mean that you can replicate that exact output in any? No, of course not. That's not the message. The message is that this happy medium, right? Of, I'm growing bigger crops and I need some fertility input, and I shouldn't be afraid of the quote unquote synthetic fertility input.
Yeah.
But I also, to be efficient and to use that properly, I need to do these other management practices that allow those nutrients to be moved through the system and delivered efficiently. And he didn't go throw 300 units on at one time.
No.
Right? And so, again, finding that, and I always joke around and say, doctor says you should drink 8 glasses of water every day. Well, wake up in the morning and chug 64 ounces of water and don't drink anything else the next 23 hours. How do you feel?
Yep.
Terrible. And so it's finding that happy medium in balance. And like you said before, Johnny, you made a great point. All these tools in ag should be at your disposal. And I get asked that all the time. Well, what should I do? Can I use glyphosate? Well, using glyphosate once every 3 years is certainly different than using it 3 times every year.
Well, and I think we've even had this conversation because I was going down the rabbit hole. This probably was 2 years ago, and I texted you. And I was like, and maybe you should reiterate it. Okay? We both understand. We both agree that Roundup can be a chelator, and it can be detrimental, right? It can be.
Absolutely.
But let's just say you go out there and you're doing one pass, and that's what you do. Is that the end of the world to that biology?
No, it's not. Look, I think that a common goal for most producers should be to reduce the amount of those types of things. And I'm not just picking on glyphosate. I mean, just to reduce.
Yeah.
Because number one, they cost money.
Yep.
Right. And if I can figure out how to operate my operation or trade off, everyone says, well, cover crops, cost $30, $30 an acre or whatever. Yeah, they do. But nobody bats an eye at the fertility bill you're throwing out or the herbicide bill. Those are they're just built into the budget.
Well, we even think about a rye. Well, maybe that first pass, you don't have to throw a group 15 on there. Okay. Is that 10 to $20?
Yeah.
Pretty quick on that first pass. Maybe you do it that second pass. And I think that's probably the thing that I wanted to get across here is like, I'm not anti, of course, the word synthetic. I'm not anti that.
Yep.
It's knowing what we're doing to that soil, what it's doing to the biology, and if it is creating stress, let's do a positive with the negative.
Yeah.
Let's get it reboosting, get it going again, which you can do that with carbon sources, right forms of nutrients. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it.
Well, and that's just it. But if you get into a situation, because again, Mother Nature likes to throw curveballs, right? A friend of mine and somebody who's been involved in soil health since the dawn of soil health, Barry Fisher, in Indiana. I mean, he said it. I went on a tour with him and he said, look, how many factors do we actually control when it comes to yield? And he said in all the things that we do control, yield is still 75, 80% determined on weather.
Yep.
Even with all the things, all the tech and all the things we have. So when those things, if you're in a situation where you've got a choice between raising a crop or not raising a crop, and you have to pull out some of those technologies to save your crop that year, save your crop.
100%.
But again, that setback is not necessarily a reflection of you and your management. You could be doing all the right things. That's just the 80%.
Yeah. Mother Nature
threw you that curveball. So you should be able, that's my thing with this, is that if you don't pigeonhole yourself into one side or the other and you can find a medium ground that works for you, then you still have all those tools at your disposal.
Yeah.
And use them when you need to. And to talk about those a little bit, because you mentioned the word stress.
Yep.
Everything that happens in an operation is stress.
Yep.
Including a 2-inch rainfall. It's a stress. Now, there's a big difference between acute stress and chronic stress. So, I think most of you as producers probably understand where I'm going with this. You get up one day and it's time to harvest. You don't sleep a lot the next night, do you? You're going to pick as long as you can pick.
Yep.
You sit in a combine for as long as you can, right? And when the right time's right, you're going. Well, staying up all night is an acute stress. You do it 4 nights in a row, it becomes chronic stress. And when you get chronic stress, you start to collapse.
Yep.
Right? Now, you take monoculture agriculture, corn, let's say corn bean oscillation, as Paul Yassa would say. So you got a corn bean oscillation. That's a stress. You've got fallow in between. That's a stress. You've got 2-3 herbicide passes, stress. You throw some tillage in there. That's a stress. It's not that any of those things are bad. It's just that you're taking a bunch of acute stressors and you're stacking them on top of each other. So that's staying up all night, eating a large pizza, drinking a 30-pack of beer, right? Followed by a bag of potato chips.
And you wonder why you need water in the morning.
Yeah, right. And I mean, and then do that every day. And then pretty soon you're chronically sick, right? You've got all these issues. So it's the same concept. It's not to say that you can do it right all the time. You go to a wedding, you have a piece of cake, you drink a couple beers or a glass of champagne or wine or whatever. Yep. That doesn't negate all of the work you did the other 364 days. So always have that idea that you're taking steps forward. Know that you're going to have steps back.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Accept it.
Accept it. You know, Russell got 20 plus inches of rain a year ago, and his corn 7 feet tall was 3 feet underwater. He went out and cut a ditch, drained the field, and then he had to pull out a disc and disc it up. And everyone's like, well, I thought you were no-till. Circumstances were pretty extreme here, you know. You're not infiltrating 24 inches of water in 12 hours. So, you know, I know some of you out there probably could. But anyway, that's the point. Those tools are there. Just keep in mind that everything you do is a stress, and your job should be to understand the stresses that you're causing and that Mother Nature's causing. Understand that if you take this action, you might alleviate this one type of stress, but you're causing another, and that's okay. But don't be shocked when different things happen. The idea that we see with soil health is how resilient the system becomes.
Yes. How much easier it is to get back to
Absolutely.
neutral.
Yes. A good friend of mine, Michael Thompson, in Almena, Kansas, very dry a couple years ago. Very dry. Soils didn't look good, right? And he's, I did all this work for years. It rained. He called me later that week and he says, I've got earthworms everywhere. Everything is, the water went in, everything's greening up. The resiliency in those systems. So it's going to look bad at times. You're going to do things that maybe you don't like. That's not part of your goal, but Mother Nature throws those curveballs. It's okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, even like early on in the crop, I've seen a lot of fields that did not look the best at V3, V4 crank out some big yields. And on the flip side, I've seen some beautiful corn at V3, V4 that don't pan out at the end. Yep. So it's about how that system is cranking throughout that year for you.
Yep. My former mentor and boss, and the reason I'm in this position doing what I do now, Dr. Ray Ward, I can't tell you the number of times I heard that man say, it's a really good thing you don't harvest your corn in June.
Amen to that.
Because, sometimes it looked really good and then it would take a turn and be worse come harvest time. And obviously at that point you wished you could harvest it in June.
Yeah.
But at the same token, it's, my corn doesn't look that great, or I've got a little bit of this and that. And I know he would tell people, just wait. Just wait. We don't have the growing degree units yet. We don't have this. And he said, that's a good thing. You don't harvest it in June. And, that's just 50 years of wisdom.
Exactly. That's exactly what that is.
But, I just said that to a gentleman yesterday, that exact quote. It is. It's tough. I don't envy, I would much rather sit where I sit than sit where most of you are sitting, because to be an agronomist, a soil scientist, a chemical applicator, a taxman, a mechanic, and then deal with all of it on a scale at the size most of you do, and with literally Mother Nature being the one
that controls 75% of it.
That's right. That's
right. Lance, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed diving deeper. We'll probably have another conversation one of these days, but I just want to say from the singular community, thank you so much for taking the time today to fill us in more about the Haney tests, your involvement, and just ideas within agriculture. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. Johnny, really appreciate what you guys are doing out there and trying to help everybody and move people, the direction they need to move and want to move. So I'm just happy to be a little part of it. Thank you. Awesome. Yeah, no, thank you so much. If you're interested, there's going to be more on the YouTube. We have series coming up, diving into foliar feeding. We've done some with Robert with his new products. Take a moment, check them out. We would love to help you out any way we can see fit. So again, Lance, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Guys, thanks for watching the content so far. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got all the full-length podcasts, other video information, tutorials on there. Also on all the major podcast platforms and social media sites, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. So if you like this, go ahead and check more out on all those platforms.